Beneath the unyielding gaze of the thorn-crowned moon, blood whispered secrets to the earth, promising blooms where only agony had reigned. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains, carrying the metallic tang of impending snow and the faint, acrid bite of torch smoke. Lyria Thornfall stood at the edge of the ritual circle, her bare feet sinking into the frost-kissed stone of the pack's judgment ground. At 28, she had long outgrown the illusions of mercy in the Ironclaw pack, but nothing had prepared her for this. The Path of Thorns, a gauntlet forged by the ancients to purge the unworthy from the bloodline, accused of treason for her silence, for refusing to seal the fate of an old ally with a lie. She faced exile not in quiet banishment, but in public torment. The pack encircled her, their eyes gleaming like shards of ice under the silver light, a sea of fur-trimmed cloaks and armored shoulders pressing close in the chill night. Her heart thudded against her ribs, a wild drumbeat echoing the distant weavos of wolves prowling the shadowed tree line. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and damp earth, undercut by the sharper edge of fear sweat from the gathered crowd. Lyria's breath fogged before her, each exhale a fragile defiance against the cold that clawed at her thin shift, the only garment they had allowed. No chains bound her. The thorns would do that soon enough. She lifted her chin, meeting the stares of betas and warriors who had once called her kin. Among them loomed the pack's enforcers, their faces etched with the grim satisfaction of duty fulfilled. "Lyria Thornfall," intoned the elder, his voice gravelly as grinding stone, amplified by the wind. "For your refusal to serve the throne's truth, you walk the path. Let the goddess judge your soul." A murmur rippled through the assembly, half reverence, half hunger for the spectacle. They believed her guilt stained the pack's honor, a whisper of disloyalty that could unravel the fragile peace after years of border skirmishes. But Lyria knew the truth. Her silence protected a fragile web of alliances, one that the ambitious Beta Council sought to shatter for their gain. Now, she paid the price. The path stretched before her, a narrow trail winding down from the judgment circle into the ravine below, a natural labyrinth of razor-sharp brambles and stone outcrops woven by the earth's own fury. Legends spoke of it as the goddess's trial, where the flesh tore and the spirit either shattered or ascended. Few Omegas survived, their bodies left to feed the roots, their bones a warning etched into the mountainside. Lyria's toes curled against the cold stone, the first prick of dread blooming in her chest like frostbite. She thought of her mother's tales by the hearth fire, of hidden bloodlines and forbidden signs, but those were children's whispers, drowned out by the roar of survival. With a steadying breath, she stepped forward. The crowd parted like a wound, and the first thorns met her soul, a searing kiss of fire that drew blood instantly. She bit back a gasp, the pain lancing up her leg like lightning through veins. Each step was deliberate, the ground uneven and unforgiving, the brambles snagging at her ankles, tearing shallow gashes that wept crimson onto the frozen soil. The wind whipped her dark hair across her face, stinging her eyes, while the moon hung low, its light painting the path in ethereal silver, turning the blood to liquid rubies. Deeper into the ravine, the air grew heavier, laden with the musk of decaying leaves and the faint, coppery warmth of her own spilling life. Her breaths came ragged, the cold seeping into her bones, numbing the edges of agony even as it sharpened the core. Why roses? The thought flickered unbidden, a fragment from a half-remembered dream. Her grandmother had spoken of them once, black petals unfurling in defiance of winter, a mark of the old queens whose line had been erased in blood and fire. But that was myth, buried under decades of the current reign's propaganda. Step after step, the thorns ravaged her, slices across calves, a deep gash along her thigh that burned like branded iron. She stumbled once, catching herself on a jagged rock, the impact jarring her shoulder and sending fresh tears to her eyes. The pack's distant chants faded, replaced by the crunch of frost underfoot and the whisper of wind through thorns. Solitude wrapped around her like a shroud, amplifying the throb of her wounds, the sticky warmth trickling down her skin. In the quiet, doubt crept in. Had her choice been folly? To withhold the lie that would have condemned Thorn Blackwood, the rogue advisor whose secrets could topple thrones? No, she thought, gritting her teeth against another stab. Truth was her only armor, even if it flayed her alive. Then, as she crested a low rise, the earth shifted beneath her. Where her blood had fallen, a tremor stirred the soil, not the quake of collapse, but something alive, pulsing. She paused, heart slamming, and looked down. From the crimson droplets, tender shoots pushed through the frost, unfurling into petals as dark as midnight oil. Black roses, their edges tipped with silver like moonlight on blades, bloomed in her wake, defying the barren path. The air filled with their subtle perfume, heady and forbidden, cutting through the metallic reek of her suffering. Lyria's breath caught, a chill unrelated to the wind racing down her spine. This was no illusion. The flowers spread, a trail of velvet darkness marking her passage. Whispers of the old lore echoed in her mind. The Thornfall line, said to bear the goddess's favor, where pain birthed beauty, exile forged queens. But that blood had been spilled out decades ago, the true heirs slain in the coup that birthed the current king. High above, from the shadowed balcony of the pack's citadel, Corvin Hale watched. The Alpha King, 39 and weary with the weight of a crown forged in betrayal, gripped the stone railing until his knuckles whitened. His silver-streaked hair caught the moonlight, and his eyes, storm gray haunted by ghosts, narrowed on the impossible sight. Those roses. He had seen them once before, in the hidden scrolls of his youth, symbols of a lineage he had vowed to bury. Guilt twisted in his gut, sharp as the thorns below. The woman stumbling onward was no traitor. She was revelation incarnate, and the throne he guarded trembled on the edge of ruin. As Lyria pressed on, the path's end looming through the haze of pain and petals, the first snowflakes began to fall, veiling the world in white mercy. But mercy was a lie here. Only truth awaited, bloody and blooming. The snow fell thicker now, a veil of whispered regrets that softened the thorn's cruel edges, but did nothing to dull the fire in Lyria's veins. Her body screamed with every labored step, the gashes along her legs, a map of crimson rivers, feeding the black roses that trailed her like shadowed faithful. The path's end emerged from the mist, a jagged arch of frost-laced stone where the ravine widened into a hidden hollow, cradled by sheer cliffs that trapped the wind's mournful sigh. She collapsed against the arch, her palms scraping rough ice, breath ragged and hot against the unrelenting cold. The world blurred at the edges, pain and exhaustion weaving into a haze, but beneath it stirred something fiercer. Survival, unyielding as the mountains themselves. In that fragile quiet, a sound pierced the storm, low, guttural, not the wind's howl, but a wolf's pained rumble echoing from the hollow's depths. Lyria's instincts flared, her omega senses sharpening despite the torment. She pushed upright, muscles quivering, and scanned the gloom. Shadows shifted among the skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the sky like desperate fingers. Fear coiled in her gut, instinctive and primal, mingling with the curiosity that had always been her undoing. Who or what lurked here, in this forsaken cradle of judgment? The pack's rituals ended at the arch. Survivors were meant to vanish into exile, not confront guardians of the wild. Then he emerged, materializing from the swirling snow like a specter forged of night and storm. Tall, broad-shouldered, cloaked in a mantle of dark fur that blended with the encroaching dusk, he moved with the deliberate grace of a predator nursing wounds. Blood scented the air anew, not hers this time, but his, fresh and metallic, trailing from a gash across his ribs where the cloak hung torn. His face, half hidden by a hood drawn low, bore the lines of a man who had stared too long into the abyss. Sharp jaw shadowed by stubble, eyes like forged steel under brows furrowed in wary pain. Corvin Hale, though she did not yet know his name, the Alpha King whose silhouette she had glimpsed only in distant processions, a figure of unapproachable authority. He froze at the sight of her, his breath hitching in a way that betrayed the Alpha's iron control. The black roses caught his gaze first, their petals unfurling defiant against the snow, a bloom that no sane soul would expect in this frozen hell. Lyria felt it then, the pull, instinctive as the moon's tide on blood. Her pulse synced with his, a subtle rhythm that thrummed through the air between them, omega to alpha, unspoken and electric. It was no gentle warmth, but a storm's edge, fear of his power, curiosity about the vulnerability etched in his stance. Why was he here, wounded and alone, far from the Citadel's guards? The king did not wander forsaken paths. He commanded them. "You!" he rasped, voice low and gravel rough, carrying the weight of command even through pain. He took a step closer, wincing as his hand pressed against the wound, crimson seeping between fingers. The roses. How? His eyes lifted to hers, storm-gray depths flickering with recognition, then denial. Guilt shadowed there, a mirror to her own burdens, but she shoved the connection aside, rationalizing it as delirium's trick. He was the throne's embodiment, the one whose counsel had orchestrated her trial. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, not when every instinct screamed of traps and betrayals. Lyria straightened, ignoring the fresh sting as weight shifted on her torn feet. The cold bit deeper, numbing her skin, but not her wariness. "Fate's jest," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. Words tasted of ash, but she met his stare, refusing to cower. The wind tugged at his hood, revealing silver threads in his dark hair, and for a heartbeat, she glimpsed the man beneath the crown, weary, marked by choices that haunted like old scars. Blood from his side dripped onto the snow, staining it red, and she wondered, not for the first time that night, what wars raged unseen in the halls of power. He advanced slowly, as if testing the air between them, his presence a gravitational force that drew her forward even as fear rooted her in place. The hollow seemed to shrink, the cliffs closing in like silent witnesses. "This path claims the guilty," he said, his tone laced with something unspoken. "Regret? Accusation? Yet you bloom where death should root." His gaze traced the trail of roses leading to her, each petal an accusation against the lies he had helped weave into the pack's history. The connection tugged again, insistent. Born of shared isolation, her exile, his hidden flight from an assassin's blade in the Citadel's shadows. But she denied it, curiosity warring with the terror of entanglement. What if he was the enemy, come to finish what the Thorns began? A distant weevo split the night, wolves answering the storm's call, and Corvin tensed, his free hand flexing as if summoning claws. "They're coming," he murmured, more to himself than her. The beta's hunt, perhaps, or rivals scenting weakness in the king. Lyria's heart raced, the instinctive bond flaring brighter. Protection, alliance, forbidden. She stepped back, thorns forgotten in the face of this greater peril, her mind racing with questions she dared not voice. Who had wounded him? Why watch her suffering from afar, only to emerge now, bleeding and broken? The snow thickened, blurring the line between them, and in that suspended moment the black roses stirred anew, petals whispering against the wind as if the earth itself urged convergence. Fear and curiosity twisted into something unnamed, a thread pulling taut in the lunar dark. But denial held, fragile as frost, for in this world of thorns and thrones, connection was the sharpest blade of all, And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The snow swirled into a frenzy, burying the black roses under a shroud of white, as if the goddess herself sought to hush their defiant whisper. Lyria's world narrowed to the stranger before her, the alpha whose presence pulled like an undertow, his wound's scent mingling with the storm's bite. She backed away, the arch's ice scraping her palms, but the hollow offered no escape. The cliffs rose like silent sentinels, trapping them in this cradle of revelations. His eyes, those storm-grayed depths, held her captive longer than any chain, flickering with a pain that mirrored her own fractured resolve. Fear clawed at her chest, sharp as the thorns still embedded in her flesh, yet curiosity bloomed unbidden, a petal unfurling in the dark. "We can't stay," he said, voice cutting through the wind's wail, low and urgent. He extended a hand, gloved in worn leather-stained dark, but she flinched, the instinctive bond warring with the scars of betrayal. Who was he to her? A king from the heights she had glimpsed only in processions, or just another shadow in the pack's web of deceit? The distant weavos grew closer, a chorus of pursuit slicing the night. Hunters, perhaps the enforcers sent to ensure the path's judgment was final, or worse, rivals scenting blood in the air. Corvin's jaw tightened, his breath fogging the space between them. "They're after me, if they find you here." The words hung, unfinished, but the implication rooted in her gut. Alliance or annihilation. Lyria's torn feet throbbed, each shift sending fresh fire up her legs, but survival demanded motion. She nodded once, terse, denying the pull that urged her closer. "Lead, then. But if this is a trap, the thorns were kinder." Her voice emerged steadier than she felt, laced with the Omega's quiet steel, honed by years of navigating the pack's undercurrents. He inclined his head, a ghost of respect in his gaze, and turned toward the hollow's far edge, where a narrow crevice yawned between boulders, veiled by overhanging pines heavy with frost. They moved as one, his limp mirroring her hobble, the snow muffling their steps into ghostly silence. The crevice swallowed them, walls pressing close with the chill of ancient stone, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten moss. Deeper in, it widened into a cavern, its mouth guarded by icicles like jagged teeth. Corvin paused at the threshold, listening, then gestured her inside. "This will shield us, for now." His tone carried the weight of command softened by necessity, and as he kindled a small fire from flint and tinder, sparks dancing like fireflies in the gloom, Lyria sank against the wall, the rough surface biting into her back. Warmth bloomed from the flames, tentative fingers against the cold that had seeped into her marrow, but it did little for the deeper ache. The rejection's echo, the pack's chants still ringing in her ears. He shrugged off his cloak, revealing the extent of his injury. A deep slash across his ribs, fabric torn and bloodied, the work of a blade meant for thrones, not thorns. Lyria's breath caught. She had heard whispers in the Citadel's halls of unrest, betas plotting against the crown's stability after border losses. Was he fleeing his own shadows? Empathy stirred, uninvited, as he tore a strip from his tunic to bind the wound, his movements precise yet pained, silver hair falling across his brow. "Assassins," he admitted, not meeting her eyes, the firelight carving hollows in his face. "The council grows bold. They see weakness in the old war's scars." Guilt threaded his words, a confession wrapped in duty, and for the first time she saw the man. Not the untouchable king, but one broken by the crown's thorns, his own path of blood and regret. The bond tugged again, insistent, turning fear's edge into something warmer, a shared vigilance against the night. Lyria rummaged in the shadows, finding a cluster of the black roses that had somehow rooted even here, their petals bruised but resilient. She pressed one to his wound, the flower's cool velvet staunching the flow, and he stilled, his hand covering hers for a heartbeat too long. The touch ignited sparks, not passion's blaze, but empathy's quiet forge, her pain recognizing his isolation. "Why help?" she murmured, pulling back, rationalizing the gesture as mere pragmatism. Survival demanded it. The hunters outside were no respecter of crowns or exiles. Yet in his gaze, curiosity mirrored hers, a bridge forming over the chasm of their worlds. Outside, the uivos crescendoed, paws crunching snow as shadows flitted past the crevice's mouth. Corvin rose, fluid despite the pain, positioning himself between her and the entrance, his form a bulwark of muscle and resolve. "Stay low," he whispered, claws extending with a soft snick, the alpha's primal fury awakening. Lyria nodded, heart pounding in sync with his, the fire's crackle underscoring the tension. The first intruder lunged, a beta scout, eyes wild with the hunt's frenzy, fur matted by storm. Corvin met him with a growl that shook the cavern walls, grappling in a blur of fangs and fists, blood spraying across the stone like flung rubies. Lyria's instincts surged. She grabbed a loose rock, heavy and cold, and struck from the side, the impact jarring her arm but felling the foe. Together, they dragged him into the shadows, breath mingling in ragged harmony. The bond solidifying, not in words, but in the visceral trust of battle shared. More came, drawn by the scuffle, but the cavern's confines turned the tide. Corvin's strikes were measured, ethical even in fury, disabling, not killing, his melancholy code holding against the night's savagery. Lyria fought beside him, her wounds forgotten in the adrenaline's rush, each parry weaving their fates tighter. Empathy bloomed fully now, her curiosity yielding to understanding. He was no tyrant, but a guardian haunted by the coup's ghosts, the throne built on erased bloodlines like hers. As the last hunter fled into the storm, whimpering, silence descended, broken only by the fire's hush and their slowing breaths. Corvin turned to her, blood streaking his face, but his eyes held a new light. Vindication's spark amid the guilt. "You fight like one born to rule," he said softly, the words a revelation hanging in the air. Lyria met his stare, the bond no longer denied but acknowledged, fragile as the roses wilting by the flames. In this refuge of stone and shadow, protection had forged something deeper, a tether against the world's thorns, where empathy whispered of destinies entwined. Yet doubt lingered, a thorn in her heart. What price would this alliance demand when the snow cleared and truths demanded blood? The fire danced, casting long shadows, and in its glow the black petals seemed to pulse, alive with unspoken promises. The fire's embers pulsed like a faltering heartbeat in the cavern's throat, casting erratic shadows that danced across the blood-streaked stone. Lyria leaned against the wall, her body a tapestry of aches, Thorns' remnants embedded in her skin, the fresh bruises from the skirmish throbbing in rhythm with her slowing pulse. The air hung heavy with the tang of iron and singed fur. The storm outside reduced to a muffled roar, as if the world held its breath in the aftermath. Corvin knelt by the flames, his broad frame silhouetted, methodically cleaning the scout's abandoned blade with a scrap of cloth. His movements were deliberate, etched with the quiet precision of one who had long learned to bind wounds, both seen and unseen. But his eyes, those storm-gray vortices, kept drifting to her, laden with unspoken questions. She felt it building, that insistent hum beneath her skin, like the earth's tremor before the roses had bloomed. It had stirred faintly on the path, a whisper amid the pain, but now, in this fragile sanctuary, it swelled, unbidden and fierce. Lyria pressed a hand to her chest, where the shift clung damp and torn, her fingers brushing the faint scar from a childhood fall, a mark her mother had called the goddess's kiss. Exhaustion clawed at her edges, but curiosity, that persistent thorn, held her gaze on him. The Alpha King, reduced to a fugitive in this hollow, his silver-streaked hair matted with sweat and snow, exuded not dominance but a profound weariness, as if the crown's weight had carved hollows in his soul. Empathy lingered from their shared fight, a thread pulling taut, yet she resisted its warmth, rationalizing it as the bond's cruel illusion, Omega instinct seeking solace in the storm. "Why roses?" he murmured at last, voice a low rumble that echoed off the icicles overhead, each word measured against the silence. He set the blade aside, his bandaged ribs rising and falling with careful breaths. The black petal she had pressed there now wilted against the linen, its silver edges dulled. Not in scrolls or songs have I seen their like since. Before. His gaze sharpened, piercing the gloom, and Lyria felt exposed, as if he peeled back layers of frost to reveal the raw core beneath. The fire crackled, spitting sparks that mirrored the flare in her veins, and she shifted, wincing as a thorn shard twisted in her calf. Blood welled anew, warm and sticky, dripping onto the cavern floor. She meant to deflect, to cloak the unease in sarcasm, but the hum intensified, a vibration syncing with the distant huevos that filtered through the stone like mournful prayers. The black roses, those improbable sentinels, had followed them here, a few stubborn blooms pushing through cracks in the earth near the fire, their petals unfurling in the heat's glow, releasing a scent that cut through the metallic reek, dark honey laced with earth, intoxicating and ancient. Lyria's vision blurred, not from pain, but from something deeper, a tide rising within. Her hand trembled as she reached for one, fingers brushing velvet softness, and in that touch, the world fractured. Visions cascaded, unspooling like threads of moonlight on snow. Flashes of a throne room ablaze, screams mingling with the clash of steel, a queen with eyes like hers falling amid a garden of black blooms, her blood nourishing roots that twisted through marble floors. Whispers overlaid the images, not her own voice, but echoes of the goddess. Pathfinder, bearer of thorns and truth, the line unbroken blooms where lies wither. The cavern spun, the fire's warmth turning to a searing light, and Lyria gasped, her free hand clutching the stone as power surged through her, a gift long dormant, the Omega's hidden vein of royal blood awakening. She saw not just the past, but threads of the present. Corvin's youth, poring over forbidden tomes in the Citadel's undercroft, his fingers tracing illustrations of those same roses, symbols of the Thornfall queens erased in the coup that elevated his line. Guilt etched his young face even then, a boy's oath to bury the truth for the pack's fragile unity. The vision shattered as she released the petal, collapsing forward, breath ragged. Corvin was at her side in an instant, his hands steadying her shoulders. The contact igniting a jolt that raced from skin to soul. Fear spiked. This was no mere instinct, it was revelation, raw and exposing, stripping her of the exile's veil. "What did you see?" he demanded, his voice stripped of command, laced instead with a vulnerability that mirrored the melancholy in his eyes. The bond thrummed, no longer denied but amplified, empathy forging into recognition. She met his stare, the storm-gray depths now reflecting her own turmoil, and the words spilled forth, halting at first, then torrent-like. "The queen, your aunt's shadow, slain not in fair war, but treachery. The roses marked her as they mark me, Thornfall blood, the true heirs, hidden in whispers and exiles." Her voice trembled, the weight of it crashing down, each syllable a thorn extracting itself from her spirit. The cavern seemed to pulse with the confession, the black blooms quivering as if alive, petals shedding silver motes that drifted like stars into the fire. Corvin recoiled, not in anger, but horror, his face paling beneath the blood and grime. He released her, rising unsteadily, the wound at his side seeping afresh. a crimson echo of the past's spilled legacy. "You, the key," he whispered, the realization dawning like moonlight piercing clouds, illuminating the ruins of his convictions. Guilt, that ever-present specter, twisted his features. Decades of ruling on stolen ground, alliances forged on the graves of the rightful line, his every decree a perpetuation of the lie. The pack's judgment of her, the path's torment, all orchestrated to silence a threat he now saw as destiny's hand. The roses seemed to lean toward her, their scent enveloping them, a spiritual affirmation under the absent moon. The cavern's ceiling a vault of stone echoing the goddess's silent decree. Lyria felt the power settle, not as burden but rebirth, a pathfinder's sight, guiding through thorns to truths long buried. Yet in his eyes, she glimpsed the fracture. The ethical king, bound by duty to the throne he had inherited in blood, now confronting the woman who could unmake it. The bond pulled, redemptive and tragic, her hidden gift not a weapon, but a mirror, forcing him to see the compassion he had forsaken for power. Outside, the wind howled anew, carrying the faint clamor of distant horns, the pack stirring, perhaps drawn by the scout's absence. Corvin's hand hovered near hers, a choice unspoken, as the fire dimmed, shadows lengthening like the dilemmas stretching before them. In this moment of unveiling, the black petals whispered of destinies entwined, where revelation demanded not just sight, but the courage to yield. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the cavern's shadows deepened as the fire sputtered, its last embers tracing veins of light across the black roses that clung to the stone like veins of midnight ore. Lyria's breath steadied, the vision's aftershocks rippling through her like echoes of a struck bell, each one carving deeper into the fragile armor of her resolve. The air tasted of ash and revelation, the metallic undercurrent of blood now laced with the rose's dark nectar, a perfume that wrapped around her senses, insistent and inexorable. Corvin stood frozen across from her, his form a silhouette etched in flickering orange, the weight of her words hanging between them like a blade suspended mid-fall. His storm-gray eyes, once veiled in melancholy duty, now burned with the raw fracture of truths long entombed. The coup's bloodied hands, the erased queen's, her own veins pulsing with the lineage he had sworn to enter. She rose slowly, the cavern floor's chill seeping through her torn shift, grounding her against the surge of power that hummed in her blood. The Pathfinder's gift was no gentle dawn. It was a thorn's bloom, beautiful and lacerating, forcing sight where blindness had been mercy. Empathy warred within her, a tide pulling toward him, the king who had watched her torment from afar, his guilt a mirror to her exile's sting. Yet resistance coiled tight, rationalizing the bond as peril's illusion. Love, if it dared name itself, was no balm here, but a chain forged in the fire of thrones contested. The wind outside howled sharper, carrying the clamor of horns and paws on snow, the pack's inexorable tide crashing closer. They had found the scout's trail, judgment's hour extended beyond the path, demanding reckoning. "We must face them," Corvin said, his voice a gravel-low command laced with the tremor of a man unmoored. He extended a hand, not in supplication, but alliance, the linen at his ribs darkening with fresh seep. Lyria hesitated, her fingers brushing his calloused palm, the contact sparking like flint on steel. Instinctive, denied, yet undeniable. The roses quivered at their feet, petals shedding silver flecks that caught the dying light, as if the earth itself urged convergence amid the storm. She nodded, the choice moral etching itself in her chest, freedom in flight, or confrontation's forge, where forgiveness might temper war's blade. Her heart thudded, a war drum against the cavern's hush, the scent of impending blood thickening the air. They emerged into the hollow as one, the snow a relentless curtain veiling the world in white fury. The crevice spat them back into the ravine's maw, where the black rose trail wound upward, defiant against the frost. Weavos split the night, a cacophony of pursuit. The Ironclaw enforcers, betas loyal to the Council's whispers, their torches blooming like hellish stars through the blizzard. At their vanguard loped Thorn Blackwood, the rogue advisor whose fate she had shielded with her silence, now twisted by ambition into the pack's self-crowned alpha rival. His furred cloak billowed, eyes gleaming feral yellow under the moon's fractured gaze, the traitor who had sown the treason's seed to topple both her and the king. Traitor queen and fallen crown. Thorn snarled as they crested the rise, his voice booming over the wind, pack warriors fanning out in a semicircle of bared fangs and drawn steel. Snow devils swirled around them, the cliffs echoing the threat, turning the hollow into an arena of ice and judgment. Lyria's torn feet sank into the drifts, each step a fresh agony that mirrored the soul's tear. The pack she had bled for now, baying for her end, their chants from the circle twisted into accusations. Corvin positioned himself at her side, his stance unyielding, claws extended, the ethical king rising against the melancholy that had chained him. Guilt shadowed his profile, but resolve hardened it. The throne's lie could no longer shield the pack from its rot. Thorn advanced, his betas circling like wolves scenting weakness, the air electric with the promise of blood. "The roses betray you both," he spat, gesturing to the blooms pushing through the snow, their black velvet a banner of the old blood. "Thornfall witch, your visions poison the air. And you, hail, usurper's whelp, clinging to a ghost's claim." His words lashed like whips, dredging the past, the coup's night, flames devouring the true queen's chambers, Thorn's blade the first to strike, all for the council's power grab. Lyria felt the visions stir anew, not as haze but clarity, threads of betrayal weaving through the pack's history. Her grandmother's fall a sacrifice to forge the fragile peace Corvin had inherited. The clash erupted in a blur of motion, the storm's howl drowning the first snarls. Thorn lunged at Corvin, their forms colliding in a tempest of fur and fury, steel clashing against claw as snow sprayed like shattered crystal. Lyria dodged a beta's swipe, her body moving on instinct honed by the path's trial, grabbing a fallen torch whose flames licked the dark with primal hunger. The fire's heat kissed her skin, a visceral counter to the cold rage in her veins, and she swung it wide, the blaze singeing fur and eliciting yips of retreat. Pain lanced her side from a glancing blow, blood warm against the frost, but the roses surged beneath her, roots twisting to ensnare a warrior's ankle, thorns drawing crimson in retribution. Corvin grappled Thorn amid the fray, their breaths ragged plumes in the gale, the king's movements a dance of restrained power, strikes to disable, not destroy. His code unyielding, even as betrayal's ghost clawed at him. "This ends the lie," he growled, pinning the rival against a boulder, the moon silvering their bloodied forms. Thorn laughed, bitter and broken, revealing the traitor's core, envy of the true line, the coup's architect driven by a freedom twisted into tyranny. Lyria reached them, torch raised, her visions guiding the strike, not to kill, but to bind, the flames cauterizing Thorn's arm in a hiss of searing flesh. He howled, collapsing, the pack faltering as the black petals spread, a living testament under the lunar eye. In the pause, breaths heaving, the confrontation turned inward. The betas knelt, not in loyalty, but awe, the roses bloom a spiritual verdict from the goddess. Corvin released Thorn, binding him with torn cloak, his eyes meeting Lyria's across the bloodied snow. A moral crossroads etched in crimson. Forgive the pack's blindness, embrace war to reclaim the throne, or choose freedom's exile, love's redemption over power's crown? Her heart tore, the bond with him a redemptive fire amid the tragedy, empathy demanding compassion where vengeance whispered sweet. "What is strength?" she whispered, voice lost to the wind but felt in his gaze, "if not choosing mercy over the blade?" The pack watched, silent now, the storm veiling the moon as if the heavens weighed their souls. Thorns' whimpers mingled with the fire's crackle, the roses pulsing like a heartbeat, symbols of rebirth amid the ruin. Lyria stepped forward, the choice hovering, union or severance, forgiveness a crown heavier than thorns. Corvin's hand found hers, warm against the cold, the ethical king yielding to the destiny she embodied, guilt transmuting to resolve. Yet the dilemma lingered, a spiritual thorn. Could love redeem what blood had broken, or would war's shadow claim them all? The snow fell heavier, burying the blood, but the earth's whisper promised no easy dawn, only the trial of hearts forged in lunar fire. The snow's relentless descent wove a tapestry of silence over the hollow, each flake a fragile seal on the bloodied earth where roses defied the frost. Lyria stood at the epicenter, her hand still clasped in Corvin's, the warmth of his grip a counterpoint to the chill that numbed her wounds. The pack encircled them, a ring of shadowed figures, betas with lowered weapons, their breaths pluming like ghosts in the lunar pallor, eyes wide with the awe of the impossible. Thorn lay bound at the ravine's edge, his form slumped against the stone, whimpers fading into the wind's mournful dirge. The black petals pulsed beneath the drifts, roots threading through the crimson snow like veins of forgotten royalty, their silver tips catching the moon's fractured light as if the goddess herself wept silver tears. Her heart fractured under the weight of it all, the vision's clarity still echoing in her veins. The Pathfinder's gift, a double-edged bloom that illuminated paths she had never sought. Empathy surged for the pack, these kin who had cast her to thorns in blind loyalty, their faces now etched with the dawning horror of truths unearthed. But deeper still burned the bond with Corvin, no longer a resisted pull, but a redemptive fire, forging union from the ashes of guilt and exile. He squeezed her hand, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers, the melancholy king's resolve tempered by the ethical core that had always guided him. Duty not to the stolen throne, but to the soul's unyielding compass. "The choice is yours," he murmured, voice a low rumble lost to the gale, yet resonant in her chest. "Reclaim what was taken, or let the roses wither in mercy's soil." The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying the distant crackle of approaching torches from the citadel. Reinforcements, perhaps, or the council's final gambit to bury this revelation in fresh blood. Lyria's torn feet shifted in the snow, sending a jolt of fire up her legs, but the pain was distant now, overshadowed by the spiritual tide rising within. Sacrifice tempted, yield her claim, vanish into exile's embrace, allowing the pack's fragile peace to endure under his reformed rule, her blood the balm for wounds she had not inflicted. Healing whispered of quieter paths, tend the rose's legacy in hidden groves, guiding lost souls without the crown's lacerating thorns. Yet union called loudest, a tragic symphony of hearts entwined, where love proved not reward, but the forge of rebirth, demanding they dismantle the throne together, petal by petal, in compassion's name. She stepped forward, releasing his hand, the separation of visceral ache that mirrored the pack's collective gasp. The roses stirred at her approach, unfurling wider, their perfume cutting through the storm's metallic bite, a heady elixir of earth and midnight, evoking the queen's fall in visions of flame-kissed chambers. Thorn lifted his head, eyes feral with defeat, the traitor's ambition crumbling under the weight of exposure. "Mercy is weakness," he rasped, voice thick with blood and bile, a final lash from the past's shadow. The betas murmured, torn between old oaths and the blooming verdict, their armored forms shifting like statues caught in thaw. Lyria knelt before him, the snow soaking her shift, cold seeping into her bones as she traced a finger along a thorn's edge. Blood welled on her skin, a droplet falling to nourish the nearest bloom, which swelled in response, petals velvet soft against the cruelty. "What is strength?" she echoed her earlier whisper, now voiced for all. The words a philosophical anchor amid the chaos, if not choosing mercy when vengeance howls loudest. The pack stilled, the wind's wail the only sound, as she extended her hand to Thorn, not in strike, but offering. He recoiled, then grasped it, trembling, the contact a circuit of reluctant redemption, his envy transmuting to shame under the moon's unblinking eye. Visions flickered at the edges of her sight, futures branching like rose roots, war's inferno if she claimed the throne by force, or a healed realm where truth bloomed without blade. Faith against despair tipped the scale. She rose, turning to the betas, her voice steady, laced with the omega's quiet authority reborn. The goddess marks no usurper. Release the lies, let the thornfall line guide, not rule alone. Corvin moved to her side, his presence a bulwark, the guilt that had haunted him for decades lifting like mist under dawn. He addressed the pack, tone melancholic yet resolute, the ethical king unveiling the man beneath. "I inherited shadows," he confessed, silver hair whipping in the gale. "Built alliances on buried queens. No more. Lyria's gift, the Pathfinder's sight, reveals the path forward. Union, not conquest." The betas knelt then, one by one, torches dipping low, flames reflecting in eyes that shifted from suspicion to reverence. The roses spread, a living carpet ascending the ravine, their black blooms a symbol of renascimento, where rejection's thorns birthed communal healing. Thorn was unbound, not executed. His choice to atone or exile left to the earth's judgment, a moral pivot that echoed through the hollow. Yet the final choice loomed, intimate and searing, as the storm abated to a hush. Lyria faced Corvin, the bond a visceral thrum, love accepted at last. Not immediate blaze, but a slow unfurling, resisted through fear and rationalized in isolation, now embraced as redemption's proof. "Sacrifice the crown," she said softly, her hand finding his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath scarred skin. "Or share its weight. Heal with me, or let freedom claim us both." His eyes softened, the melancholy yielding to a tragic joy, guilt's chains snapping in the lunar light. He drew her close, forehead to hers, breath mingling warm against the cold. The alpha's strength in vulnerability, her omega's resilience in forgiveness. "Union," he vowed, the word a seal, blood and fire and moon bearing witness as the roses encircled them, petals brushing like blessings. The pack dispersed into the night, carrying the revelation like embers in the dark, the citadel's distant spires silhouetted against the clearing sky. But in that suspended breath, as snowflakes kissed their joined forms, the spiritual dilemma resolved not in triumph, but quiet rebirth, love as the ultimate sacrifice, curing the realm's wounds through entwined destinies, where power bowed to compassion. The earth sighed, roots delving deeper, promising a dawn where thorns bloomed eternal roses under the goddess's approving gaze. Yet whispers lingered, what shadows might yet rise from buried lies. The moon watched, eternal and impartial, as two souls forged from exile claimed their redemptive flame. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. The dawn crept over the Frostfang peaks like a hesitant lover, its pale light filtering through the thinning veil of snow to gild the black roses that now carpeted the ravine in defiant splendor. Lyria stood at the hollow's edge, the wind's sigh a gentle caress against her skin, carrying the faint, earthy perfume of petals unfurling under the moon's fading gaze. Her body ached with the echoes of thorns and battle, gashes bandaged in haste, bruises blooming like shadowed kin to the flowers at her feet, but the pain was a distant murmur, overshadowed by the spiritual tide that had reshaped her soul. The Pathfinder's gift pulsed within, no longer a turbulent storm, but a steady current, guiding her through the labyrinth of choices that had led here. From exile's bite to this fragile union, where love proved its mettle not in ecstasy, but in the quiet forge of shared burdens. Corvin remained at her side, his presence a solid anchor amid the shifting world, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The Alpha King's form, etched with the night's toll, silver hair tousled by the gale, storm-gray eyes softened by revelation, exuded a melancholy peace, the guilt that had shadowed him for decades transmuted into resolve. He had yielded the throne's solitary weight, confessing its foundations of blood to the dispersing pack, his ethical core demanding not dominion, but restitution. The Betas had carried the truth back to the Citadel like embers in their cloaks, whispers of the Thornfall resurgence spreading through the stone halls, eroding the Council's grip like frost on iron. Thorn Blackwood, the traitor's husk, had been led away in chains of his own making, exile chosen over death, a moral pivot that mirrored Lyria's mercy, his ambition's fire quenched by the rose's unyielding bloom. Yet rebirth was no swift bloom. It demanded sacrifice's blade, carving space for healing's roots. Lyria turned to him, her dark eyes meeting his, the bond of visceral thrum that resonated in her chest like the earth's hidden heartbeat. The air between them hummed with unspoken dilemmas. Destiny's pull toward the crown she could reclaim, versus the freedom of shadows, where their love might flourish unseen, untainted by power's thorns. Faith had tipped her toward compassion, but despair's whisper lingered. What if the pack's awe curdled to resentment, the old lies resurrecting in hidden daggers? The moon, now a sliver on the horizon, watched impartially, its silver light dancing on the snow-dusted petals, symbols of her lineage's endurance, where rejection had birthed not ruin, but renewal. "I see it all," she murmured, her voice a poetic cadence woven with the wind's hush, fingers tracing the velvet edge of a rose that brushed her ankle. Visions flickered at the periphery, futures branching like roots through frozen soil, a realm healed under joint rule, alliances reforged in truth's fire, or a quiet life in mountain exile, tending hidden groves where omegas like her might find sanctuary from the pack's cruelties. The gift revealed the cost of each. Union's crown would demand her heart's exposure, the omega's tenderness armored in royal steel, while freedom offered love's pure flame, unburdened yet isolated from the souls she could redeem. Corvin's breath warmed her temple as he drew closer. His scent, pine resin and blood-tanged earth, mingling with the roses, a sensory tapestry of their entwined fates. "Strength lies in the choice that mends, not breaks," he replied, his tone laced with the tragic depth of one who had ruled through shadows. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing a stray tear, born not of sorrow, but the overwhelming surge of acceptance. The love between them had resisted every step, rationalized as instinct's trick on the path, denied in the cavern's refuge, tested in battle's fury, until now, embraced as redemption's proof, a bond that transcended hierarchies, proving the goddess's design in pain's crucible. No immediate passion ignited. It was a slow unfurling, tender amid the tragedy, where his guilt found absolution in her forgiveness, her exile healed by his vulnerability. The pack's horns echoed faintly from the citadel, a call to assembly, the air stirring with the scent of approaching dawn fires, torches kindled for a new era, or perhaps the last stand of old fears. Lyria's heart clenched, the ethical thorn piercing deep. Power tempted with justice's promise, to uproot the betrayals that had slain her forebears, yet compassion urged sacrifice, yielding the throne to a council reformed under his guidance, her role as pathfinder, a spiritual compass rather than scepter. She chose then, In the hush before the world intruded, leaning into him, her lips brushing his in a kiss that tasted of salt and moonlight, sealing union not as reward, but as the ultimate cure, where love's light pierced despair's veil. "We heal together," she whispered against his mouth, the words a vow etched in blood and bloom. "Not as king and queen, but as the roots that bind the pack anew. Let the roses guide, and mercy crown us all." Corvin's arms encircled her, strong yet yielding, the Alpha's power humbled by the Omega's quiet reign. The visions clarified in that embrace, a realm reborn, thrones dismantled for circles of shared truth, her gift unveiling paths of faith over force, destiny woven with freedom's thread. The snow melted under the rising sun, revealing the black petals' full glory, a sea of midnight velvet ascending the peaks, their silver tips shimmering like stars fallen to earth, the earth's blood singing of Renascimento. As the first rays warmed her skin, Lyria felt the spiritual weight lift, the dilemma resolved in love's redemptive arc. Sacrifice of solitary crowns for union's hearth, where suffering's thorns yielded eternal roses. The wind carried distant weavos, not of hunt, but harmony, the pack's souls stirring to the flame they had kindled. In this epic dawn, under the moon's watchful retreat, two broken hearts forged wholeness, proving that redemption bloomed not in glory's blaze, but in the compassionate choice that defied the night. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.